Word of prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for this day when we can remember the things that happened at the first coming of your Son, and also look forward to his return and his second coming. We just pray, Lord, that you'll bless us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today we're going to talk about It's Your Deal. So I want to talk first about some things about Christmas, the time of year that we choose to celebrate the birth of Jesus, and the time of year when everybody starts fighting on Facebook about Christmas trees and all this other stuff. So I'm going to recommend an article of Sharon Gilbert. Derek Gilbert wrote a pretty good article that's contrary to there's one camp that says, a tree is an idol and it's worshiping and that sort of thing. And so Derek and Sharon Gilbert at their website, and I don't have it handy, you can find the article. I think Sharon wrote it about sort of looking into that thing. Many years ago, there was a video by Rob Bell, and I could play it for you, but I don't like to torture you at Christmas time. But in the video, it was very clever what he did. He went through a lot of the characteristics about the birth of Jesus, and he said, but every time he came, born of a virgin, born at a certain time of year, he then went to, this was what the Romans taught about their god Caesar. Remember, Caesar became a god a little bit before the birth of Christ. They were elevated to the level of God. But it was very clever because he said it was like, the implication that he made in this ridiculous video was that the Christians, we borrowed all the stuff from pagan Rome. And it was a big fat lie, because a lot of the stuff that later became associated with Roman Caesars, Roman rulers, was borrowed from Christianity historically. And so what Rob Bell did on a lot of occasions was he told a big fat lie, but he had a slick video, so a lot of people watched it. And I've talked about Bell a lot. I bought one of his books. And the thing that bothered me, one of the things bothered me about it was a book. It cost like, I don't know, $15, $18, $20. But it was mostly white space. And then after reading the book, I came to the conclusion that I stand by today, that Rob Bell, the value in Rob Bell book was in the white space, where there was nothing written. So anyway, it's interesting at the time that there's this war in Gaza and in Israel and in the north, that for example, this is the Financial Times in the UK writing about the fact that Gaza war steals Christmas spirit from residents of Bethlehem. And again, one of the things that it's designed to do is to engender sympathy for the poor Palestinians. And understand, look, this war is terrible. There are people dying. There are Christians dying. There are Muslims dying. There are Jewish people dying. Secular, religious, it doesn't make any difference. It's war. This is what happens. And listen, I support Israel. I think they have a very difficult situation. But this Palestinian Jesus thing that's become a narrative that's pushed by groups like Christ at the Checkpoint. I went to a Christ at the Checkpoint conference back in 2018 in Oklahoma City. I actually saw the doctor that I sat next to at dinner one night. He was one of the featured speakers. And I was asking him questions like, why do you have all these Palestinian refugee camps in Arab countries? I mean, why don't your own people free you? Well, it's the occupation. And I couldn't make any headway from him because he's just totally blind to it. So, but I'm telling you, I get some of the most, if I come out in support of Israel and I say I understand what's going on in the war, it's a very difficult situation. What are you going to do? The vitriol that I get from people, you're just a worldly non-Christian guy, it's unbelievable. And it's war, folks. That's the issue. And Israel's in a very difficult situation, as we'll talk a little bit today. But now one of the things is, this thing about Jesus. And so here's an article in the Jerusalem Post today about 21st century identity crisis of a Palestinian Jesus. This is the narrative that's being taught in places like Bethlehem by people from Christ at the Checkpoint. Here's a picture of a Lutheran church in Bethlehem during a wartime. This is from the New York Times this morning. During a wartime Christmas, there's rubble in the manger. And so you see how this event that we celebrate, that's so very important, and the fulfillment of a lot of Bible prophecy, is politicized. One of the most political aspects was Pope Francis in 2014, who went to Bethlehem to do a mass in what they call Manger Square in Bethlehem, outside the Church of the Nativity. And by the way, the Church of the Nativity is built oversight, and there's a little grotto there, and it's got a silver star. And I'm pretty sure that's where Jesus was born. I think that there's good historical evidence for that. The fact that it's the Catholics have a tendency to kind of build over everything, even though they're authentic sites. So that was one of the places where Constantinople built, was at Bethlehem. But look at the images in this, of what you see in this backdrop to the Pope performing a mass in Manger Square. And you see the baby wrapped in the Palestinian scarf. You see Joseph with that on. You see Mary in essentially what's a burqa. And then, of course, the three wise men are the three predecessor popes to Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict, the 16th, or whatever number he had. They're the three wise men, of course. And so you see how the imagery works there, and they're politicizing Jesus. By the way, the Pope, frankly, I've listened to some of these things. I've read articles about this. I've read criticisms of it, and I don't understand what the guy did. He's blessings for same-sex couples that must not resemble marriage. It might make sense in his leftist mind, which is not a Christian mind, in my opinion, and you can try to figure that out. But here's this is some of the things that are happening now. This is a concert I think in Europe. And you see they've got the bomb there. They've dropped over the side the Palestinian flags. They're disrupting everything. And this is happening. They shut down the freeway to O'Hare Airport, pro-Hamas protesters. And because we can't celebrate Christmas, you can't either. Here's another one. This is in a church in Melbourne, Australia. And you can see they've jumped up on stage, carols by candlelight, and they're there unfurling things. That's the reason why a lot of churches like us have security, so you can deal with these people. But this is the narrative that they're doing. I want to share with you a few verses in Scripture today as we get started. And years ago when Pam and I were in Hebron, and I was there again just almost exactly a year ago at Tel Media, the site of the ancient city of Hebron. And then you can look out into the distance and you can see the cave of Machpelah. Let me get my pointer here. You can see it right here in the photograph where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah are buried. And got a good piece of advice from Joel Kramer, who's there. He says, this is the only verse you need to read at Hebron. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, and he pointed to the ground because this is where the ancient city was, where David ruled for 7 years when he became king in Israel, and the son of Abraham, and he pointed over the hill a couple miles away is a place called Mamre. And at Mamre, this is where, I'm not going to read the whole passage, you can go to Genesis 18, where 3 men showed up, and they visited, well, I'll read the first part. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So these 3 come and they give Abraham a promise. And they said that, they gave them the promise that they were going to have a son. And Sarah laughed, remember, because she was 90 years old at the time and Abraham was 100. But this is where that, I don't think there's any question in my mind. There's a lot of secular and Israeli secular archaeologists who say, everything about Abraham was a myth. And Joel Kramer makes a point then, why did people go building these places around? Why would you build something totally based on a myth unless there's a real person? And Herod built there as well because it was important to the Christian faith, the promise of the one that would come. And that's exactly where that took. That round circle you see in the dark area in the lower right, that's actually right here. That's where the trees, one of the trees grew up through the bedrock. God met Abram by the oaks of Mamre, and you can read about that. So, and then up the road a little bit from Hebron this is Rachel's tomb, Jacob's other wife, who had died and is buried there. By the way, if you want to see really one of the better explanations about that, if you can get that Route 60, the Biblical Highway movie, I know it's produced by TBN, but it's available now. I think you can get it through Amazon and Apple TV. It's about $20 to buy. You can also get a DVD. And it's quite good. And David Friedman, the former ambassador to the U.S., went to the tomb of Rachel here and told a very moving story about how he went here and he prayed that his son and daughter-in-law would conceive, that he would have grandchildren. They had just been married, and then he found out a couple months later she was pregnant, and it turns out that the conception, based on the due dates and everything, appeared to happen around the time, right when he was there praying, that he would have a grandchild. So, but in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, it talks about this. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are of old, from everlasting. And this is an example of how what I call the logistics of Bible prophecy have to take place. Because here's a promise given in Micah hundreds of years before it happens, that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, Ephratah. Now, what happened? Well, first of all, you have to have a preservation of the line of Abraham all the way through. And then you have to have the people that will parent the virgin who shall conceive, who's also from the line of David, by the way, and the line of David through Joseph, her husband. You have to get the right people, and they have to be there at the right time. So there's this logistics aspect to these fulfillments of Bible prophecy that we see, and we see this all the way through. And then there's also in John chapter 1, we read about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. So John goes, Matthew does the genealogy back to Adam, but John goes on one step further. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him, nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which gives light to every man coming into the world. And so John really takes it just to a whole another level. Verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And then we, hang on a second here. I was setting up something differently this week. Let's see if this works. Now, hang on here. I was messing around with my settings and I messed it up. Okay. Okay, now I don't even know what I did. Hang on a second here. I'm going to have to shut down. Apologize for this. PM will attest to the fact that I've been messing around in my office all week. And I've changed the... Okay. So it's Brian's fault. So wonderful he came in here. So let's talk a little bit about process updates. So today I'm going to focus mostly on Israel and maybe be out of here a little bit earlier than usual. I know I always say that, and I guess maybe my resolution for the new year ought to be don't say that anymore, because you know it's not true. But we talk about the acceleration, convergent logistics, and understanding with what's going on in Israel and some of the geopolitics involved. It's absolutely crazy out there. Let's look at a few things that we see. You're going to see a lot. Next week, I'm going to do sort of a highlight of 2024 program. It's not going to be 8 hours long. I know some of you wish for that, but we're going to talk about climate change, COP28, some of the things that are coming here in the future. One of the things that I'm sort of looking for is the speech of King Charles, which I haven't seen yet. He did speak, but one of the things they're doing, this is from CNN Travel back in November, it's time to limit how often we can travel abroad. Carbon passports may be the answer, and some of them are suggesting you get one flight in your life. Except the elites, of course. I read a statistic this week. Somebody went through and calculated like the elites that go to the climate change conference in Dubai, they fly all their private jets and that type of thing, that the top 1% of the world in their life, an individual will do more carbon emissions than 2/3 of the world's population combined. And the whole thing is insane. And so King Charles is, a lot of people, some people think he's the Antichrist, and I take an open view to that. We'll see when the facts on the ground match. And then people argue, well, you don't understand the facts on the ground. Yeah, I've read all the articles, I've read the books, seen the interviews. So let's see, okay? So some people are looking for what's going to happen over the next couple weeks. And this is him speaking at the Davos meeting, World Economic Forum in 2020. The thing that I think is important is the imagery. And you see, like, right above his head, and no other speaker got this, was this what looks like a crown. So I researched it, the format, and there's a symbol that's associated with the British monarchy. So you can see that this symbol matches. So they did this, and the colors match all the colors of the Sustainable Development Goals that are supposed to be in effect till 2030. This week, I will talk probably a little bit about our election things. There was a Colorado decision that said that former President Trump can't be on the ballot. The whole thing is a mess. I thought this quote was interesting that somebody said, like most of those who study history, he learned from the mistakes of the past how to make new ones. And that seems to be, and we'll talk about AI and that type of thing. I had a long conversation with Scott Townsend this week. He spoke at one of the conferences that I went to, and he's done a lot of work on technology and AI and what's coming. And I'm just telling you, things are moving so rapidly. Nobody's regulating it. Everybody talks about regulating it because they don't want to scare people to death. But nobody's doing anything really to regulate this. This is kind of an interesting development geopolitically, and then I'm going to get to Israel after one more slide. German brigade in Lithuania set to be combat ready by 2020. So this is the first time since World War II that Germany has deployed troops anywhere. But here it is, what is it, 2023? This won't be combat ready for 3.5 years, which is kind of interesting. Europe has a lot of issues with being a military power again. And there's concerns that Putin's going to do this. There's people say that he's signaling that he wants to resolve the situation in Ukraine, and I don't really know. So let's look at Israel. So I'm going to make a recommendation on a couple articles that you read. The links will be in the notes below in the description of this video that Brian, our great video guy, crafts so well each week. I just sent him a slide, and then he just pours this stuff out all over it. Blessing. But so one of the articles is Jonathan Spire in the Jerusalem Post on Friday, a three-front conflict in the Middle East. And I think the website title is a little bit different. The website title is that I had the thing here. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. The title on the website is a little different. It's called "The Middle East is Under a Three-Link Conflict Option." So let me just read about this. He's going to talk about the three major fronts that Israel's facing right now. We know about Gaza. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Three-link conflicts are currently underway in the Middle East. These are Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza, the lower intensity battle underway between Israel and Hezbollah in the north, that's 2, and 3, the Houthis' maritime campaign in support of Hamas against international shipping in the Red Sea Gulf of Aden. So he's going to go through and he's going to review these. Now, I finally found some graphics that I really like so you can kind of understand Israel. This is a 3D representation of the topography of Israel. There's some key features that you need to do. So, of course, Gaza's here in the south. You have the coastal plain, the red area. That's where the majority of Israeli population lives. It's their industrial business heartland. Tel Aviv is located there. Haifa, Nahariya is at the farthest north. Netanyahu. All the tech companies. If you drive up along there, you'll see all these, Microsoft, Google, Intel, all these signs. And that's where they live. But the problem is that it's largely indefensible. For example, if they gave up the heights of the West Bank, the white area there, that's Judea and Samaria, and you can see that it sits above. And so when you have a coastal plain that varies between 37 kilometers, roughly 20 miles, and 9 miles wide, you can get artillery, drones, missiles, and you can just wreak havoc. That's where their only international airport is their major international airport, Ben Gurion, is located. It's not very defensible. And there's also some other issues, is that this white area of the West Bank is largely the area where the water falls when it rains. And then they collect the water, so it's the watershed. So all of these talk about, and I'll talk some more about it through this talk, everybody wants a two-state solution. I heard many interviews this week. One was John Mersheimer, the University of Chicago, geopolitical historian analyst. I don't agree with him on a lot of things. He's very bright. He calls himself, I'm a realist. And he said in an interview this week on a YouTube channel called The Unheard, U-N-H-E-R-D, The Unheard, he said there's not going to be a two-state solution. It's just not possible with the current environment. And people talk about that a lot. And Mersheimer, he will say, for example, he did an interview about a month ago with the same guy, and he said, well, Putin went into Ukraine because Putin felt threatened by Europe. And so he had to go into Ukraine to protect himself. It's because Mersheimer would say, I'm a realist. But then when he talks about Israel, why does Israel have to go into Gaza? And people say, well, what's going on is an existential threat to Israel. He says, well, wait a minute, Israel's a nuclear power. There's no existential threat that's going to come against a nuclear power. But a month ago, Putin, who's got the most nuclear weapons of anybody on the planet and the most capable ones, he was like, well, he was threatened. Well, now, John, you can't, Dr. Mersheimer, you can't have it both ways. I think you call yourself a realist. I think what you need to call yourself is an inconsistent realist, particularly when it comes to Israel and the Jews. I mean, I'm just saying that. So here was a speech that Raisi gave this week. And during this speech he gave in Tehran, the President Raisi slammed the unconditional support of the so-called advocates of human rights, not the least the United States and certain Western countries, for the crimes against the Palestinians. Quote, what is even more unfortunate is the ineffectiveness of the international organizations who claim to defend human rights with regard to the incidents in Gaza. He said that the horrific war crimes in Gaza stem from an unjust world order. He then stressed the need to shape a new world order. And there's a lot of things going on. You got BRICS, and they're trying to change the dollar denomination on petrol transactions. This is also an interesting article in Friday's Jerusalem Post. What will Gaza look like after the IDF pullout? And everybody's like, what is it going to look like? I mean, I think in northern Gaza, they've destroyed or completely rendered inhabitable about 68% of the buildings. I mean, they're really going at this hard. They're losing soldiers. I think they've lost about 135 at last count. And I see these stories. I mean, if you follow some of the Telegram channels, you see all these heartrending stories about the funerals of these young IDF soldiers, what great people they were. And look, understand, the same thing's going on in Gaza. There are people having funerals because there's lots and lots and lots of people being killed. And you see these guys coming home, though. They come home on leave. They surprise their parents. Saw a video of one guy who came home. His sister was getting married. She's in her wedding dress, getting ready for the wedding ceremony, and he showed up. She had been told he wouldn't be there. So it's a very emotional thing. But this analyst talks about the fact that what's Gaza going to look like after the IDF pullout. Here's a couple paragraphs from that article. The post-war options for the future of Gaza have started to take shape as world leaders are formulating plans for the day after the war. The main options that have risen to the top of the international discourse include an Israeli military zone in northern Gaza resembling Israel's Area B model in the West Bank, where Gazans will lead civil life while Israel retains security control inside the Strip. A multinational force headed by the United Nations that will govern Gaza. If that's true, lock up your kids, because those international forces don't behave the right way. Similar to the role of UNIFIL in southern Lebanon today, which does nothing. The rule of a regional multinational government headed by moderate Arab states, such as those who normalize relations with Israel, that's kind of an interesting potential day after. Or another one, or ruled by the Palestinian Authority, the party which governs the West Bank, but is considered controversial and extreme amongst the Israelis for its underlying support of terrorism. And it does. Currently, most Israelis do not believe that Gaza can be handed to the Palestinian Authority or any other Palestinian entity for fear that within a few years, whoever would be left in charge would attempt another massacre. The results of a recently published opinion poll highlight the lack of trust. According to the Palestinian Center for Policy and Research, or Survey Research, 57% of respondents in Gaza and 82% in the West Bank believe that Hamas was justified in launching the October attacks. 82% in the West Bank. By the way, if they held another election in the West Bank, Hamas would win. I don't think there's any question about that. Mahmoud Abbas has been, he's like in the 14th year of his 4-year term. Or it might even be more than that. It might be a 17th year of his 4-year term. And he's old. I mean, he's 87. You wonder how long he's going to be able to hold on. And what's the day after Abbas looks like? That's another question. Back to this article. When asked if they believe that Hamas committed war crimes, only 5% of the participants in the West Bank answered yes, and only 17% in Gaza. So the Gaza people have more favorable opinions, I guess, of Israel than the people in the West Bank. The overwhelming majority answered no, while only 7%, 1% in the West Bank and 16% in Gaza said it did. These polls indicate that a significant percentage of Palestinians support the evil and murderous acts of Hamas. That's without question. So Israel really has, in addition to the three fronts that Jonathan Spire is talking about in the article that we're referencing here, there's actually at least another front that would be in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, biblical Judea and Samaria. But that would also be, I think, a fifth potential front would be internally within Israel. And then you can add in Jordan and Egypt, which are potential. So I thought this was an interesting picture that was taken in Gaza. It is Hanukkah. I thought that was, I posted on my Facebook page and I said, take some combat engineers, mix it with the spirit of the Maccabees, and this is what you get. And I know you can just don't bother sending me hate mail about it, okay? I find this interesting. Now, this is from the Tehran Times. The Golani Brigade in Israel has withdrawn. They've lost many soldiers, and they're going back to sort of regroup. But the way the propaganda machine runs in Tehran is, oh, look, they failed. They're running away with their tail between their legs. I don't think they would say their tail between their legs because they don't like dogs in Iran. But that's neither here nor there. So this is the way the propaganda machine works. Now, this guy, Sink Yigar from the Young Turks, and this is what he said in a tweet. And I'm going to play for you part of his debate with Douglas Murray on Piers Morgan program. He says, every genocide supporter is outing themselves right now as they look at Douglas Murray's insipid, fact-free, nonsensical defense of mass slaughter in Gaza and obvious disdain and hatred of Palestinians and think he did a good job. Wow, that's telling on yourself. So I'm going to play a little bit of their discussion. Now, I will give you a warning. I didn't go through and edit out. I don't think there's any bad language, but with this guy, if you ever want to watch a video that's entertaining and humorous, go find the video of the Young Turks discussing the election results in 2016 election. Because they thought Hillary was going to win. She was a lock. And as the night went on, he was like, okay, now we need to issue like a DEFCON 5 warning. because this is, or whatever it was. It's quite entertaining to watch. So here's Douglas Murray and Cenk Uygur on Piers Morgan. I think Douglas Murray first.
No, and I think that most of the people who think they know how to execute this war have never executed a war. Indeed, most people who think they know how the IDF should be running this conflict have never been near a conflict. I'm in Israel tonight. I was in Gaza again yesterday. And the examples that you give, by the way, Piers, I don't see why they show any need to prosecute the war itself differently. I mean, just to take one of them, the first example you give, the absolutely tragic, awful shooting of these 3 hostages as they were coming out. But, you know, some of the spin that's been put on that in the world, apart from the glee, of course, that Israel's enemies can't help expressing, some of the spin on that is almost as if it shows the IDF is sort of so brutal that it even kills Hamas hostages who are Israeli. I just think this is another example of the international media and others just having this astounding lack of empathy for the Israeli people. Can you imagine what it was like for those soldiers who were in Gaza, knowing that at any point there were snipers, there are booby traps everywhere, people coming out of tunnels that they've built at British and American taxpayer expenses and attacking them? Can you imagine what it was like for the soldiers who, in that terrible moment, made the life-changing mistake of shooting 3 people who turned out to be Hamas hostages?
Why would they? But Douglas, on that, why would they shoot anyone who was shirtless and waving an SOS flag? I mean, why would whoever they were, whether they were Israeli hostages or whether they thought they were Palestinians, why would anyone shoot anyone who comes out like that? That's my point.
That'll be a matter for the inquiry into it. But look, it's hardly as if they'd have wanted to have done that. What this demonstrates is, in this incredibly close conflict in a heavily built-up area, people coming out from all sides, firing, shooting, detonating, people make mistakes. Of course they do. That's just a human reality of war, horrible as it is. I don't think it shows in any way that Israel is prosecuting this war wrongly. As for the main issue of the war is to destroy Hamas. No Israeli of left or right or center believes anymore after October the 7th they can live beside Hamas. Hamas has been given the statelet of Gaza. It was given it in 2006, voted in, then killed their fellow Palestinians in a coup, killed Fatah rivals, and they've run the Gaza for almost 18 years now. And they've produced a new generation of people whose main aim in life, it seems, according to their textbooks and their classes, is to regard Jews as enemies who should be killed. This is just an unbelievable waste, a waste of life on every side. But apart from anything else, a waste of those Palestinian lives, of children who grew up under Hamas's rule, if you can call it that, who have been indoctrinated into becoming sociopaths by a psychopathic terror organization, Hamas.
All right, Jen, you've been listening to that. Is there anything that Douglas said that you agree with?
No, nothing.
Not even about the way Hamas has presided over Gaza in the last 18 years?
Yeah. So that's a weapon of mass distraction. It's Israel doing genocide on the Palestinians right now. And there's IDF soldiers singing and in video that the IDF has confirmed about how they're going to wipe out the seed of Amalek. That is a verse in the old Hebrew Bible that talks about exterminating Amalek. So they're talking about genocide against Palestinians. Benjamin Netanyahu has also talked about wiping out Amalek. These are open calls for genocide. What I find stunning, Douglas mentioned stunning lack of empathy. There's 20,000 dead people in Palestine right now in Gaza. Over 8,000 of them are children. When 36 Israeli children were killed by Hamas, the world cried out, and I was brokenhearted over it. 36 poor kids dead in Israel. Now there's over 8,000 dead kids in Gaza. You want to talk about a stunning lack of empathy. 6,400 women slaughtered in Gaza. You want to talk about terrorism? They're dropping unguided bombs, 2,000-pound bombs. Every one of those bombs is an act of terrorism. And the stunning lack of empathy towards Palestinian lives is disgusting. But I want to be clear, it is not shared by all Israelis. The dad of one of the hostages who was killed went on Israeli television and said, stop killing them. And he didn't mean the hostages. He meant the Palestinians.
All right, but Jake, let me just jump in. But before I go back to Douglas for response to this.
Let me reply to that, Piers.
Yeah, I will let you reply to that. On this issue of genocide, do you accept, though, that Hamas's whole raison d'etre when it comes to Israel is genocide? They want to eradicate Israel and kill as many Jews as they can. I mean, they've made no secret of this.
Yeah. So this is really important. Yeah. So I have no sympathy for Hamas. So I am not interested in defending Hamas. I think that's nothing but a distraction. Because right now they're not fighting Hamas. They're just killing Palestinian civilians.
Well, they're also killing Hamas terrorists. They are. I mean, they're killing thousands of them.
Barely. No, wait a minute. Barely. But let's go to your main point, okay? So the main point is, well, Hamas threatens X, Y, and Z and has killed 1,200 people on October 7th. So that is why we have to all worry about what Hamas might do.
I don't think it's simple as that.
Hold on, let me finish the point. Let me finish the point. At what they might do if they had infinite power, the kind of power that Israel has. Meanwhile, Israel is actually doing the genocide, is actually preventing a Palestinian state and saying you are not allowed to exist. And if you dare try to exist, we'll kill 20,000 of your children and women.
All right, Douglas, respond to that.
Several things. First of all, anyone who uses the term genocide in this context simply doesn't know what they're talking about, or is a malevolent actor. I don't know if Mr. Uyghur's traveled at all in his life, how far he's traveled, how many conflicts he's seen, but I'd have guessed none. And you clearly know nothing about this particular conflict, and you've obviously seen none of it. The genocide that you describe is such a smear and a libel against the Jewish state. If Israel wanted to commit genocide, I'm sure it could, but it doesn't. It doesn't remotely want to. And people like you and other pro-Palestinian propagandists have spent years claiming that Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza. By the way, the weirdest thing about this claim is that the population of the Gaza has grown by 1 million in the last 15 or so years. So if Israel was trying to carry out a genocide, it's either the worst perpetrator of genocide ever or uniquely poor at performing that task. None of the stats support that ridiculous claim. And it's such a weird smear and a libel of Israel. Secondly, of course, you've just rattled off Hamas figures, as every one of your kind always does. Thirdly, you said that the world cried. You said that the people like you who cover for the Palestinian extremists. Thirdly, you said that the world cried out for the 36 Israeli dead children. No, they didn't. And you know that very well. You know that very well. If you put up a poster to a missing dog in any Western city, that poster stays up. In city after city in America, posters of abducted Jewish children, including a 10-month-old baby, were put up and were ripped down by people who have been indoctrinated into hate of Jews. Nobody would rip down the poster of a missing dog, but from Dublin to Berkeley, they ripped down posters of abducted Jewish children. So no, I don't think there was
Douglas,
very much care for that around the world.
Let me put this to you, Douglas.
Let me make two other very quick points. Firstly, you said what Hamas might do, as if it was some kind of hypothetical. Hamas showed what they do, what they want to do. It showed it on October the 7th, and its leadership, as I'm sure you very well know, said that they would like to repeat that again and again until they have got rid of every Jew. So, I don't know. I would trust Hamas's word on that rather than your interpretation of what you think they mean when they say that. And
Well, and that's the problem with people in the West is we don't understand there's a Middle East mindset. As Dr. Kadar, I saw a couple interviews with him this week, Mordecai Kadar. He said, listen, you have to show who the strong horse is to get respect in this part of the world. You don't do that by running around negotiating, giving up land for peace. It never works. It won't work. And it's a fool's errand, but everybody tries to do this. Now, let me address. So this is one of the things with Gaza. I've seen this. This is an old, from classified U.S. documents from 1963 about that they wanted to build a Ben Gurion canal. So I see people who I respect, who I think are smart, like Martin Armstrong and other people, saying, well, they want to build that. They're doing this thing in Gaza. They set this all up so they can build a canal across it. None of the maps that have ever been done on any of the proposed canal projects in Israel go through Gaza. It's just not. Here's a little closer up. They go north of Gaza. There have been a number of other proposed canals and water projects. One was called the Med-Dead Project, a pipe that would go from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea. Actually, there'd be two pipes. One would go to the Jordan River up near Beit Shan. And if you understand that area, the ocean is, this is kind of a fact that I think a lot of people don't understand. Sea level is sea level pretty much all over the world. There's a couple little exceptions like that, but I feel pretty confident in saying sea level is sea level all over the world. In fact, I saw a picture, the rising oceans. Saw a picture of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, 1890, and then a picture taken this year, and the sea level around the island is exactly the same. So it seemed like if there's rising sea levels, you don't have like rising sea levels in Antarctica. I understand we have to allow for tides and all this other stuff. You don't have rising sea levels in South Africa and not have rising sea levels in New York. What's the one thing Pam and I say when we're driving? The flattest thing in the world is still water. It's like glass. But nobody's building this canal. So there's the Dead Sea, and what they're going to do. So the Jordan River at that area around Beit Shan is probably below 600 feet below sea level. So that's like a 60-story building from the Mediterranean down. So you could put a pipe down there, put some turbines in, use it to desalinate the water, and then to generate some power, and then to replenish the Jordan River, because the Jordan River everybody's taking water off it, and by the time it gets to the Dead Sea, there's nothing there. That's why the Dead Sea is evaporating. Then there would be a Med-Dead pipe, and then they also talked about a Red-Dead thing with Jordan that actually received the approval of the UN. They would, because it's 1,300 feet, it's a quarter mile down, and they could use it to generate power, desalination plants, and replenish some of the Dead Sea. And it wouldn't really drain the oceans that much. I mean, it's sort of like my joke was that they were helping out with rising sea levels by pumping seawater into the Gaza tunnels. The oceans are pretty big. You have to remove a lot of water from them to have any impact. So there's nobody building this tunnel. There was somebody who also read it, said, well, they're just flattening Gaza so that they can easily build a canal through there. It's like, but the canal will have to be, I think, it's going to have to be at least 120 feet deep. And you might notice between the Red Sea, which is down here to the right, there's these things in the middle called mountains that you got to go through. So I just don't think it's happening. Now, this is happening. This was published today on jns.org. It's a good site. I would highly recommend that you put that in your regular bookmark it and review it. And this is saying the UAE Israel land corridor is expanding to Egypt. This is what they were talking about at the G20 meeting. This is what Benjamin Netanyahu was talking about at the UN, was the development of this corridor, which is land, pipeline, and railway. That's how they're going to get things to bypass going through the Red Sea, because, as we'll see in a moment, that's the next point. The third point, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the north. So this is what Jonathan Spire says in his article about. So we have the Gaza front, and now we have in the north, around Lebanon and Syria. We were focusing our efforts on the south, but Hezbollah is continuing to act with aggression, said Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, speaking to journalists in Kibbutz Rosh Hanikra earlier this week. We can do the same if needed against Hezbollah as we are doing against Hamas. We have evacuated our civilians from the immediate danger zone, and we're in a defensive posture because we're focused on our operations in Gaza. Jonathan says this: a low to medium intensity conflict is currently going on north and south of Israel's border with Lebanon, with daily exchanges of fire, constant alerts, deaths on both sides. Israel clearly enjoys the tactical advantage, and this is reflected in the casualty figures. Somewhere just over 100 Hezbollah fighters have died so far. That's really pretty significant, especially compared to a 37-day war, Second Lebanon War in 2006, along with 17 Lebanese civilians and 1 soldier of the Lebanese armed forces. On the Israeli side, 7 soldiers and 4 civilians have died, as reported by Reuters. The mood among the Israeli troops deployed in the north appears upbeat and determined, and they're going to go forward. Now, this, I was going to play this last week, but ran out of time. This is probably a 6-minute clip of Sarat Zahavi, who is the founder of Alma Research, Israel-alma.org. Highly recommend that you follow it because she does the group does tremendous research with regard to the situation in the north and what's going on. And you'll hear what she has to say. So here, this is from the IDSF briefing on December 11th.
But if we have any diplomatic arrangement, who is going to enforce this? Because you must understand that Hezbollah is deployed in every third home in South Lebanon is used for Hezbollah military purposes, whether it's logistics, whether it's headquarters, whether it's intelligence, and whether it's rocket caches. And who is going to take the rockets out of the homes? When we look at what is happening in Gaza today, you understand that the process of cleaning a town or a neighborhood that is full of munition and that is fully prepared for war, it's not something that it's easy to be done. And Hezbollah is not going to voluntarily doing that. So it may put faces, pretend that if, we will withdraw to the Litani River. And even this, I don't think it's the probable scenario. But I don't see Hezbollah just withdrawing. Even when we talk about deterrence, and which is again, it's a very problematic word in our neighborhood. But if we talk about the achievements of the IDF until now, if we talk about attacks inside Lebanon, I don't see these attacks pushing Hezbollah further north voluntarily. Okay, it will take much more than that, much more pressures than that. And international pressures that are coming from the West directly on Lebanon are also not a solution, because these international pressures are working with the Christians of Lebanon that are the opponents of Hezbollah anyway, but they don't have the power to enforce this. So these international pressures should work on the Iranians, which are the real boss here, rather than the Lebanese government, which is actually meaningless with regard to the capability to implement any arrangement that will include the withdrawal of Hezbollah from South Lebanon.
And then so the presence of the UN, are they doing anything positive? Is it just hurting the situation? Where does the UN fall out with this?
Somebody asked me to turn off the computer behind me, so 1 minute.
Yeah, I know everybody that watched, they're going, what's she watching on her computer back there? Well, the
UN is deployed in South Lebanon, exactly in this area that was created in the end of the war in 2006, from the border to the river, to the Litani River. In most areas, it's around 20 kilometers into Lebanon. In other areas, it's much less than that. And this area was supposed to be empty of any illegal military presence, whether it's Hezbollah or any other organizations. For the sake of implementation of this resolution, 10,000 UN forces were deployed in South Lebanon. But the resolution doesn't say who should implement or enforce. And there is an article in the resolution that says that the mission of the UN is to assist the Lebanese army establish this area which is free of any weapon. And at the same time, it is saying that the UN can do whatever it takes to make sure that this area is not used for any violence. So this is the kind of contradiction inside in the resolution. This is a kind of contradiction in what this resolution is saying. This actually created the reality in South Lebanon that is a reality of an ineffectiveness of the UN. The soldiers of the UN are not entering into private territories. So it means they're not only not entering into houses, they are also not entering into olive orchards, for example. They are not entering into the Shiite towns of Lebanon. They are not entering anywhere where the rockets are. And that's why this mechanism didn't work. Now, I used to say, until the past year, I'll be honest with you, that the UN was effective with regard to preventing an escalation that nobody wanted. Meaning that the UN was there on the borderline itself, and if there were clashes between IDF soldiers and Hezbollah, or IDF soldiers or Lebanese army forces, well, in most cases, the UN succeeded in calming this down. Even with this level of calming things down, the UN failed in the past year. And we have seen more and more clashes and more violence in the past year, more and more presence of Hezbollah in the past year on the border, which created a situation that UN was completely ineffective. But if we...
So she goes on to say, listen, we can't live there. So, for example, here's a graphic. You're going to see the line here from the ocean to the east. That's the Sea of Galilee there. And that area there along the border, that's what's been evacuated. There are about 80,000 people that don't live there anymore. That has a tremendous impact on the economy. They don't have jobs. They're living in hotels in Jerusalem. I saw an interview with Colonel Richard Kemp from the UK, who has been in Israel, giving a lot of support to the IDF and others. And so I was in Tel Aviv in my hotel, and everybody was from the north. There are no tourists because everything's pretty much shut down. There are some volunteer trips that people are taking to help out. Some people are taking bulletproof armor vests over for people because they don't have enough. They called up all these soldiers. They don't have enough for everybody to have. So people are supplying that to Israel, but they've had to evacuate, and it's having this tremendous impact in that wide area there. That's where Kiryat Shimon is. I've heard that out of 25,000 people who live there, maybe 3,000 are still there. And she says, look, she lives near there. She lives up in that area. And she says, you can't live like this. And we have to be able to live from border to border in Israel. So we don't know what's going to happen. So now the third part that Jonathan Spire talks about is this thing that's going on in the Red Sea. This is a map. You see the Arabian Peninsula there in the middle. Let me go back to get my laser pointer. And Yemen is right here. This is a very, very poor country, one of the poorest countries on earth. But they have cruise missiles, they have drones, and they're just wreaking havoc in the area right now. And this area of Yemen, in the western part of Yemen, is controlled by a group called the Houthis, which, well, I don't understand anything that Joe Biden does, but our government and State Department removed them from the terrorist list, which means that now they're going to do whatever they want. They're Iranian proxies, they're Shia. The rest of Yemen is Sunni, and so they've been in a civil war for many years. And Saudi Arabia's tried to manage that conflict. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. People are displaced. By the way, how many marches have you seen for displaced Yemeni people? I mean, do you see them marching on campuses? No, because it's Jews that they don't like. You got to get that through your head. So they're messing this gate. And so there's a good article at a paper that was published about 5-6 years ago by Chatham House, which is a political think tank in the UK. And I don't agree with them, but they published kind of a slick publication, 120 pages of various maritime choke points. About 90% of international trade moves by the ocean because it's the cheapest. And so, but there are choke points around the world. Here are some of them. So you have here this strait between Yemen and Djibouti and Somalia. It's about 20 miles wide, but the shipping channel is much narrower than that. Here's a close-in picture of that. And so it's only about 20 miles across, but the ships have to, you can kind of see the channel there. They can't get too close to shore. So effectively, you can have these guys who don't have much of anything, and they can cause a lot of problems because to get to the the Suez Canal, you've up here, this length of the Red Sea up here from the Suez Canal all the way down here along Saudi Arabia is about 1,200 miles. But that's a major choke point. There's another one that's kind of coming to the fore. Of course, we know the choke point there in the Persian Gulf that most of the world's oil a big chunk of the world's oil comes through. And a lot of the oil goes up through the Suez Canal. It's about 11% of world trade and about 20% of the world oil. And again, that's about 25 miles wide, that area right there that ships can go through. So it's a choke point there off the United Arab Emirates. Another one is the Straits of Malacca down near Singapore and Malaysia, Indonesia. And they've shut that down. At least the government has shut that down. So we're not going to let anybody come through here because you might have Israeli cargo. If you have Israeli cargo, we're not going to let you come through. Now, a little bit north of there, that's the Thailand Peninsula, and a little bit to the north. No, I thought I had something there. So that's a choke point. When we have the Dardanelles, there's the Bosporus in Istanbul. And that's only in some places a half mile wide. That's everything from the Black Sea has to go through there. So there are treaties and all that. And the Turks effectively control that. Then there's also a place called the Dardanelles. And you can see the faint red line there to the north end of the Dardanelles. That's about a 1 mile long bridge that just opened within the last couple of years. So that's a choke point. You have the Straits of Malacca. You have Gibraltar right here near Europe. And that's only about 3 miles between Africa and Spain. So all this shipping has to go through there. Then we have the English Channel. That's about 20 miles or so across, 25 miles. And then you have Russia. Of course, Russia doesn't have much in the way of seaports. Now they're trying, because the Arctic ice isn't as bad as it used to be, they're trying to do a North Passage. But from St. Petersburg, if you go here, pull out just a little bit, you have to go all the way down here past Denmark. And so you've got this narrow passage here that you got to go through. And remember, that's where then that's only, there are bridges across that thing. And then of course, you have the Nord Stream pipeline that was blown up. By the way, remember Putin said a couple months ago that one of the pipes of Nord Stream is operational and we could start things tomorrow. And there's also some word that some people that know more, have more connections than I do, they tell me things, and they're saying that the word is that he's been repairing the other parts of the Nord Stream pipeline. And that's kind of interesting. So that's, and then of course you have the Panama Canal. But that's the Panama Canal here. I forgot to put my red line there. And that's having trouble right now because the water's so low, because they have the lakes that they use, but there's a drought. The lakes are low. You can't send through ships that carry much of a draft. The fully loaded super tanker called a VLCC would carry about 2 million barrels of oil, and it would displace, it would be about 80 feet deep in the water, fully loaded. So you need to have things. So here in this thing here with going on, you have these super tankers, and so it's interesting, sort of the political thing. The Saudis came out and said, well, don't get into a war over it. Well, it's affecting the shipping and your oil. But they think, well, we can probably manage it. The U.S. can handle it. We can shoot down drones. But the problem is the drones cost in the low thousands of dollars, and the missiles we've been using to shoot them down cost $2 million each. And we don't have that many. And that's a problem if we get into another war someplace else. So this is Iran, I think, deciding to bleed us. And the alternative routes add a lot. So like the Panama Canal, it's like 11,000 miles around South America, and against around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, it's a similar distance. And it adds anywhere maybe 3 weeks of travel time. It increases shipping costs by 40%. And those ships have to use more oil to travel. So the Saudis may be doing this in their own self-interest and say, well, we don't really care, because when they have to go around these long distances, we sell them the oil. And that's 500,000 barrels a day. That's a lot of money that they get for that thing. So the U.S. has deployed a tremendous amount of firepower there, and this doesn't even include, this is just in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, Gulf of Oman, and Persian Gulf. Doesn't include what we have up there in the Eastern Mediterranean. And so here's a speech that Khamenei he gave yesterday. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei calls on Muslim countries to prevent the delivery of fuel and other products to Israel, which he claims prevents water from entering the Gaza Strip. And it's creating tension with Turkey, because Turkey's still shipping oil to Israel. His comments came as a drone strike reportedly damaged a ship off the coast of India. The U.S. on Friday said Iran had been deeply involved in the planning of attacks by Yemen's Houthi rebels against commercial vessels in the Red Sea, disrupting global shipping. A report I saw the other morning, it might have been on Fox, or I think it was on Fox Business, saying this is disrupting global shipping, going to increase costs, delivery times, and this is worse than what we went through with the supply chain disruptions during the Charlie Vector 019er situation. Muslim nations, Khamenei says, should demand that from their regimes to stop assistance to Israel and break ties with it. Khamenei also claims that Israel will one day be wiped off the face of the earth. God willing, this promise is one of the certainties of the future. Young people, see that day with your own eyes, with God's help and strength, and with God's permission and glory. And God willing, I hope that you, the youth, will see that day with your own eyes. And I'm not going to play the other parts of his speech. And so here's this Iranian ship has been providing things. This is the New York Times this morning. And then also, Iran says, hey, we're going to shut down the Mediterranean. By the way, there were some cyber attacks in Iran the other day. Of course, immediately they're blaming Israel. Could be. They had problems with their gas supplies, and they had a couple gas transmission places blow up. They usually come out and say, well, it was a diaper factory or a popcorn factory that had a sewer gas explosion or something. So this is a problem. This is a good article in the Jerusalem Post. To be Jewish in America right now is to feel a sense of urgency. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism. We saw the university presidents from Penn, Harvard, and MIT. By the way, the Harvard president there are a lot of people demanding that she resign. Studies have shown that she clearly did plagiarize certain documents, including a conservative lady named Dr. Carol Swain, who's been attacked her whole career because she's African American and she's conservative. And she got pregnant when she was like 15 or 16, grew up very poor, worked hard, got her PhD, taught at I think she made tenure at Princeton and then later at Vanderbilt, but she was just attacked mercilessly. Why? Because she didn't go with the flow. But she was plagiarized by this Dr. Gay, Claudine Gay from Harvard, who, by the way, didn't grow up poor. Do you know this? Her parents were some of the ruling elites of Haiti. And she didn't have to work to go to school or anything like that. So, but now they're saying it's not plagiarism, it's duplicative citation or something. You know, they're changing the language again. Heard somebody say, we're in the midst of a battle for control of the dictionary. And you see that happening about every day. But this is a lot of hypocrisy. Look at this. Millions displaced as Sudan's deadly civil war escalates. How many marches are you seeing about Sudan? 6.8 million people are internally displaced in Sudan recently, and the civil war that's been going on there for a while. Have you heard any protest about that? Any marches? No, it doesn't happen. Up in Syria, since 2011, March of 2011, 12 million people have been forcibly displaced from their homes. A lot of them went to Europe. We know the immigration problems, and a lot of them appear to be coming here with what's going on our border, which is nothing short of an invasion. So this is a good editorial. Anti-Zionism is deadlier than anti-Semitism. By the way, there's a good article that Jonathan Spire also wrote in the Wall Street Journal on Thursday or Friday talking about Hezbollah has really started the war in the north. And the concern, I think, that a lot of people have is this war takes off in the north. For example, this slide, their missile threat. What they would do is they would shoot all the weak missiles, the garbage missiles that they have, which are in the tens of thousands, and they would overwhelm the system, deplete down the Iron Dome, and then they go in with their guided missiles. And that would be a big problem. And talks I've seen are estimates of 25,000 civilian deaths if they do that. So that's a problem. Canada, they're bringing in Gazans if they have relatives in Canada. Justin Trudeau says, of course, he's not the brightest guy in the world. Says he supports a two-state solution, but Hamas can't participate in negotiations. So everybody, I see these old Mossad people, IDF people, retired, some of them, they're like, oh, we got to have a two-state. That's the only thing that will work, and it won't work. By the way, here I made up a map of the Arab countries. I copied it off the internet. These are the Arab countries that are not accepting Arab refugees from Gaza. Oh. So that's, so Macron, they don't want this, France is coming out, they don't like Macron doesn't like what Israel is doing. Le Monde, a French newspaper, they came out with a article quoting a guy from a research tank saying, well, this is what we'll do is we'll make the Hamas leadership leave Gaza and go to Algeria. This is what they did with Yasser Arafat. I think Tunisia, they were used at one time. And it didn't work because why? Because Yasser Arafat came back. You know, you don't have him living in prison. It doesn't. This is a sidebar. Biden, everybody involved with marijuana sentences got pardoned by Biden. Blanket. So you can do blanket pardons. And I'm not sure why Republicans never do that when they're in office or were in office. And that's a problem. Was it cocaine too? Okay. Well, then it's worse. But the guy says, well, I was misquoted. This was my personal opinion, and it wasn't the Gulf Research Center that had me do this. This is an interesting thing. This is a news release from United Nations Human Rights Watch, which, you know, these are the guys that funded these schools in Gaza that taught kids to be terrorists. If you want to read about that, go to a website that tracks the educational materials. It's called Impact-SE, Impact-SE. And you can see they've done tremendous research on looking at the UNRWA materials that they allowed to be used in UNRWA schools in Gaza. And don't tell me that the UN is not in on this thing big time. And then let's see. So this is a article with Caroline Glick. I'm not going to reference it because if I do, I will go over my thing finishing a little bit early. I will violate my Christmas gift to you. But go to JNS and read Caroline Glick's article from the other day, I think Friday, about all the stuff that was done wrong in the Israeli military. And she's been very honest with it. There's a lot of people who are concerned about Israel and politics, and are these people really working on our side? They really, really miss this, and we got to deal with the situation. And I think there's a growing belief that we need to deal with the situation in Israel. We need to deal with the situation politically and militarily and leadership-wise, even while the war is going on, because we can't have the people who allowed this to happen and caused us to be asleep to handle everything. We just can't trust them, and I think that's growing. So politically, it doesn't look good for a lot of people in leadership. The concerns about Netanyahu are growing, but Caroline does a great analysis of what's happened over the last generation in Israel, where we'll have a small mobile IDF. Well, that doesn't really work when you have 4,000 people invade you from a small area on your border. It's hard. They didn't have the people there, even though they knew that there were potential problems. They said, well, we got it under control. Well, I guess history didn't judge that one very well. So this is the two-state solution, was everybody talks about. That white area in the upper, at the top, that's the Golan Heights. I don't see Israel ever giving that back. I just don't see how it would be possible, because I remember the first time I went up there in 1995, and I'm not a military expert, but I read about what happened and how important the Golan was and what they were doing to the kibbutzes down along the Sea of Galilee. They're just dropping artillery shells down on them all the time from what was then the Syrian-controlled Golan Heights. And I thought, this is the most military, you always want to control the high ground. It's the most militarily strategic piece of land I've ever seen anywhere, because of the close proximity of the coastal plain. And the same thing with the West Bank. You just can't give that up, but everybody's going to push. And this is what a lot of people, so when we talk about Bible prophecy, a lot of times we talk about this greater Israel. What's this going to look like? And so this is what some people think Israel's going to look like before there's a solution. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think I'm sort of grounded. I know that I have friends who believe this is going to happen, and then there's going to be a peace agreement. I just don't know. I don't know logistically how Israel has the people to take over that part of that much land. You're talking about Cairo, the canal, all the way to Baghdad and Iraq, Syria. So, maybe it happens. That would be the logistics part of my analysis. How do they do that? And they could do it. There could be miracles that happen. I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying, as I'm sitting here and looking at it, and I don't see it. So, the house of cards that we have, as I said when I started this, it's your deal. The world seems to be like a house of cards that's falling apart. I haven't even talked about the economy, and we'll do some of that in the year-end update. So anyway, appreciate it if you would. Click like, subscribe, whatever you do. You can click on the little bell to get notifications. And we'll be talking more to you at least next Sunday, if not before. I have some interviews coming up after the first of the year. David Fiorazo, a couple, and Tom Hughes, and some others. Some of those will play on January 2nd. I told David Fiorazo he was having me and another lawyer on the first 2 days of the year on his Worldview Matters program that he started. And I said, you're either setting the bar really, really high, or you figure you can only go up from there by having lawyers on the first 2 days. So we'll see how that works out. So let's pray, and we'll talk to you more, maybe this week, but certainly next Sunday, a year-end review. Oh, by the way, it's going to be called As Easy as 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 12, 31, 23. Now, somebody said those numbers add up to 6, 6. Anyway, let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for your word. Lord, we thank you for the blessing that you gave to us through your word of giving us information so we could identify the first coming of the Messiah, and that you've given us information so that we can be prepared and ready for the Lord's return. We pray that you will help us to keep that always in mind, give us opportunities to share the gospel. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.